right, so we got through about 20 outfielders on yesterday's podcast. We've got some work to do. Welcome in to Fantasy Baseball Today on Wednesday, February 12th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, it's our outfield preview part 2. We are going to try to get through the rest of average draft position, deeper sleepers, and breakouts, our favorites to target at the position, and much more. Let's get right back into it. We are looking at Fantasy Pros ADP using Fantasy Pros ADP minus ESPN. Of course, they've got some wonky things going on with their rankings and their ADP so far. And reminder that we are using CBS position eligibility for this exercise. And so I'm going to throw these names at you guys in groups of 3. Later on in the podcast, we'll go to groups of 5. But we left things off with Teoscar Hernandez on yesterday's show. And today we have round 7 of a 12-team league. We get Anthony Santander at ADP 73, Brenton Doyle with an ADP of 73.5, Lawrence Butler with an ADP of 79. Santander coming off a career-high 44 homers, good bet for power production. He signed a 5-year deal with the Blue Jays this offseason. The other 2 names we spoke about yesterday, Scott had Brenton Doyle as a bust, and then you guys fought over Lawrence Butler. Is he a breakout or a bust? I don't know. I'll let you decide. Chris, do you typically target any of these 3? Santander, Brenton Doyle, Lawrence Butler?
No. Well, probably Doyle the most. If he falls, which happens a little more frequently than with Butler, I think. Santander, it's a wholly specific team build thing where if you need power at this point in the draft, you can take on Anthony Santander. I don't love drafting him off the career year. He's probably not going to have 44 home runs again or really all that close to it, because this was one of those ones where if you look at like home runs plus doubles, which is not something that we actually do, but bear with me. Home runs plus doubles. He had 69 in 2023. Would you like to know how many he had in 2024? The same number, 69. I'll answer it for you. It just means that he had 16 more doubles in 2023 and 16 more home runs in 2024. That seems pretty random. Put it in the middle, he'll hit 34 and be a very good source of power, a decent source of RBI, and that's probably it. I would expect better than the 235 average from last year, but not so much better that it's, game changing. So it's just, we know what he is at this point in his career. He's a perfectly fine power hitter, but he doesn't really do anything else. So
I think his cost is fair.
I think the cost is fine. It just depends on, I usually don't specifically need power only at that point in the draft.
His fly ball rate last year, Santander, was 55%, when usually it's closer to 50%. And so I think that's what contributed to the career high in home runs, the career low in batting average. Put him back in the randomizer machine. He probably comes out with more like a 250 batting average and 35 home runs with a lot of playing time. So really solid run in RBI production. And I think he's one of those players who I if my pick comes up and it's time to draft him, I just draft him, and then I work around it. So kind of like Kyle Schwarber without the walks in leagues where that doesn't matter, which means it's going to be fewer runs scored too. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the profile you're looking at here with Santander.
Yeah, and Santander incredibly durable too. 152 plus games, 3 years in a row. Like I mentioned, off to the Blue Jays this offseason for Santander. These 3 names, better in roto categories or head-to-head points?
I think all 3 of them are better in roto.
Santander, I think, is pretty good in points just because he doesn't strike out much.
He doesn't strike out
much. I was kind of surprised how high his points per game were last year. 3.22, which was higher than Churio or Merrill or Julio Rodriguez, all guys who we expect to improve this year, but still, it was surprising how high it was.
Can I bog us down in the 5th minute of the episode?
Yes.
Because I don't want to only give the downside for Brenton Doyle, which is what we did on yesterday's podcast.
It was my best pick. Yeah.
Scott was pooping on him, and I don't think that's fair because Brenton Doyle, I think all the cases that Scott made were fair. I will say it's interesting that we're giving Lawrence Butler the benefit of the doubt that we're not giving to Brenton Doyle. I don't know how fair that is. Brenton Doyle actually a better hitter over the course of his minor league career. And the thing is, look, the underlying numbers are better for Lawrence Butler than Brenton Doyle, but Brenton Doyle feels like a safer bet for stolen bases for like a 30-plus steal season. And the underlying numbers last year were not bad. He was a 328 xWOBA, which is 329 xWOBA, which is about 15 points better than the league average. His actual xWOBA, or his actual WOBA, 328. So actually right in line, which would expect someone who plays half their games at Coors Field to overperform. Generally speaking, I pulled a stat a couple weeks ago about Michael Toglia, where like something like 85% of Rockies hitters over the past in the StatCast era have outperformed their expected batting average. So that's one where like you see a 254 XBA, he could hit 270 pretty easily just with the help of Coors Field inflating his BABIP. I think there are real downside risks. There's the risk that he just goes back to being who he was in 2023. But if he can sustain a lot of the gains that he made last year, I think Brenton Doyle's a really, really good pick here.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if he's who he was last year, he's appropriately drafted. I'm just skeptical he's who he was last year. Yeah. And
Lawrence Butler is who he was last year.
Well, I have a clear understanding of why he became what he was last year. And I feel like if he's who he was last year, the upside is even higher than what we saw from Brenton Doyle last year.
Yeah, agree on all fronts. If he can repeat the plate discipline, Brenton Doyle potentially undervalued where he's going right now. But the ADP this time last year, 386. So again, this is just something that I struggle with, but going from a near 400 ADP all the way up to a top 75 pick is a little too much for me to stomach. But
you should be skeptical of anyone who jumps that high.
Yeah. All right, we drop down into the 80s in ADP where we find Brian Reynolds, an ADP of 86.3. Seiya Suzuki and Luis Robert have the same exact ADP, 87.5. So 3 names right in this range. You have to decide which one you like most. Brian Reynolds might be the most consistent hitter in all of fantasy. You know what you're going to get. 260 to 270, 25-ish home runs, 10-ish steals, doesn't blow you away, solid deep league player. Seiya Suzuki has been pretty consistent the past 2 years as well. Strong batting average, some power and speed there. Luis Robert, a wild card. We saw the upside 2 years ago, but then struggled with health and production last year. There's a chance that he just was never healthy. He dealt with that hip injury very early on in the season. Scott, I think Robert is the most interesting of the 3. Could turn out to be a big win in fantasy. Do you find yourself drafting any Reynolds, Suzuki, or Luis Robert?
So this is a really interesting range of the outfield rankings, this kind of 20 to 25 range. It goes a little beyond 25. But it's a mishmash of high variance players and low variance players. So it almost kind of depends just how deep your league is, how your build is going so far, just how much risk tolerance you have in general, which sort of player you target. You got the high variance types, which are Lawrence Butler and Brenton Doyle and Luis Robert. And if you want to lump Mike Trout in here, we haven't gotten to him yet, but he's not far behind. Same sort of thing. And then the low variance guys are the Brian Reynolds, Seiya Suzuki, Riley Greene, who we haven't gotten to yet, but I would consider him low variance at this point. And when I was first putting together my outfield rankings, it's like, well, do I want to lean toward the high variance guys or the low variance guys? And I'm still kind of unsure. I started with the low variance guys higher, and now I've put the high variance guys higher because I just tend to pursue upside in general. But it depends how deep the league is, like I said. Luis Robert is somebody I'm worried about because I know he missed time with injury last year, but the strikeout rate just exploded. It was out of this world high in a way that like he's going to have to fix that to get back on track. And given this, like I hate to play armchair psychologist, but I just can't shake the feeling that he was just not that motivated last year with as bad as the White Sox were. And I don't know that they've gotten any better.
I don't think they can be worse, Scott. So I guess that's the good
yeah, I guess. But man, look at that roster. It's still going to be the worst team in baseball. Maybe the Marlins.
Hey, the Marlins. Come on, let's
the Rockies.
be fair.
Maybe too. I think those are the 3 teams in baseball with a 0% chance of making the playoffs, and every other team has at least a slight chance. But anyway, yeah, he's fine at this point, Luis Robert, but I almost consider him the highest variance of the high variance guys I listed off, and so I tend not to draft much of him. And then Brian Reynolds and who was the other? Seiya Suzuki. Seiya Suzuki feels like he's a little higher upside, but he also has a little bit of injury risk that Reynolds doesn't have. And so I tend to lean Reynolds, but they're both fine. Like I don't have any concrete concerns for Reynolds or Suzuki. So if I'm just looking to plug in a safe option in the outfield, I'm fine with either one of them.
Chris, do you worry at all about Suzuki being a full-time DH for the Cubs? His agent came out early in the offseason and said, Suzuki is not a DH. He wants to play the outfield. And the Cubs said, all right, well, we're going to trade for Kyle Tucker. We have a full outfield already. Yeah. I guess you just have to be the DH, say Suzuki. Does that worry you at all?
No, I mean, what's the worst case scenario? He gets traded? Like, I guess the worst case scenario, he's just bad, but I don't really have much concern about that.
Adjustment period where, you go from playing the field every day. Now you're a DH, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I think it'd be a good thing in the short term because it would remove some of that injury risk. It would be bad for next year, but
I would imagine he played at least some DH last year, right? Yeah, he started 59 games. He basically split time between DH and right field last year, and there was no really noticeable difference in how he performed. So no, I don't know. I can't say, right? Like it's possible some guys just don't lock in the same if they're not fully engaged, but I can't say that's the case. And from what I understand, since that initial statement by his agent, they have softened the language, and there was a Craig Counsell interview from a few weeks ago where it sounded like everything was good there. So no, I'm not concerned. I think Seiya Suzuki is a really good hitter, and I think there's room for him to become a great hitter. Even if it's not necessarily, he is old enough that you probably shouldn't expect another step forward. And the underlying numbers, I don't know how likely it is that he takes a step forward there, but even if he doesn't, 25-15 with a helpful batting average and a good lineup, there's nothing wrong with Seiya Suzuki.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably going to be my most drafted outfielder. Spoiler alert for later on. I was all over Suzuki last year. You just have to avoid that one IL stint, so maybe playing DH could keep him healthy, like you mentioned, Scott. That would be nice. But yeah, I think good batting average. You mentioned 25-15 could be a fair projection here for Seiya Suzuki. Before we take our first break, just a reminder to download and follow our 10-minute podcast, FBT Express, wherever you listen to podcasts. And big thanks to everyone watching us live. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball Today. This is Outfield Preview Part 2, and we are continuing on with ADP. We left off with Luis Robert, and just a heads up that we are going to skip past some names we spoke about on other position previews just to keep things moving. For example, Spencer Steer, Cody Bellinger. Those are the next 2 names up, but we talked about them on our first base preview. So we move outside the top 100 in ADP. We find Riley Greene at 101.5, Mike Trout at 102.5, and Christian Yelich with an ADP of 107.3. Riley Greene, just 24 years old, continues to improve. I question how high the upside really can get just because he plays his home games in Comerica Park. It's a tough park to hit in, and he just doesn't steal bases. Even with that, he's a fine player, what he's developed into. Trout and Yelich, I don't know. 33 years old, both returning from different surgeries. Trout had 2 surgeries on his left meniscus last season. Yelich is coming back from back surgery. Both were really good when they played. Trout's sample size, obviously much smaller than what we got from Christian Yelich. Chris, we talked about this recently. Are you worried at all about the recent reports on Christian Yelich that they're going to bring him along slowly in spring and don't know if he's going to be ready for opening day type thing.
It's less that and more just coming to grips with the fact that it's a 33-year-old coming back from back surgery. And I was maybe being a little too...
I moved him down a lot.
I think I'm gonna steal a Scott word, blasé. Blasé.
Blasé, is that a word I use?
I feel like that's a word you've used.
I've probably
once.
used it before.
And so I'm
sanguine. Sanguine is the word I use.
That's the word.
That's the one.
I am increasingly worried about just what Christian Yelich's likelihood of actually living up to expectations are. It's annoying because he was really, really good last year.
Yeah.
Kind of bounced back to MVP level. And if he can get there again, I would love that. But it's just, how many times do you want to bet on a 33-year-old doing that? It doesn't seem like the smartest bet you can make. I think I'd rather let him go until more like 120 in the ADP is probably where I'd be a little more comfortable with him. And I would actually much rather have Mike Trout. I don't know if that's a hot take, but I think Trout's the better player, and the injury that he's coming back from is one a little less recent, if I'm remembering correctly, and just a little less severe.
It happened twice to the same meniscus, which was frustrating.
But
that's
here's the thing I want to point out.
Okay.
I want to go on a very short rant.
Sure.
One, I'm not looking at the comments, but I'm sure there are like 12 comments that are like, he can't stay healthy. We know he can't stay. I don't care. We're all aware. We get it. Mike Trout can't stay healthy. We're all on the same page on that one. We don't need anyone to say it. Don't ever say it again.
The stat is he's played 41% of his team's games the last 4 years.
He is more annoyed about this than you are. Here's what I will say. From his age 31 through 34 seasons, Ken Griffey Jr. played 81% of his team's games. The 4 years prior to that, actually, I might have it wrong. From his age 31 to 34 seasons, he missed 51% of his team's games. In the next 4 years, he played 81%. So I just want to point out that the other historically great, no doubt about it, first ballot Hall of Fame center fielder whose career was derailed by injuries, did stay healthy in his mid to late 30s. I'm not saying Mike Trout is fated to follow the same career path. I'm just saying that when the only knock on a player is they can't stay healthy and they come at a significant discount, you should buy in. Because if Mike Trout did manage to get 600 plate appearances, top 20 player at least.
I mean, 600 probably isn't going to happen. Let's aim a little lower than that.
But that's what I'm saying. If he got to 600, there's no doubt he's a top 20 player, right?
Sure.
He was on a 50-30 pace last year.
And I'd be surprised if he ran more given the injury.
Or set a career high in home runs.
But his per 150 game pace over the last 4 years is still like 47 homers. And I did look at what just taking his 162 game pace from the last 4 seasons and taking 20% off. So if he did manage to play 80% of the team's games like Ken Griffey Jr. did in that stretch, 276 average, 87 runs, 37 homers, 76 RBI, 6 steals. That's awesome. That's probably a top 50 finish.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a huge win at his ADP right outside the top 100. It's just nobody knows. We just don't know whether or not Mike Trout is going to stay healthy.
And it's especially hard in those deep roto leagues where, if you miss on the pick, you're
in a points league though, 3 outfielder points league. Yeah. Good replacement value. Yeah. You could take that.
He is the most, I just said Luis Robert was the most high variance of the high variance group. Well, that was until we got to Trout, because I think Trout is actually number one, to the point that I don't think I can take him in a 15-team roto league unless
15 would be hard
unless he slides to like pick 150 or something, something unrealistic. If I could circle back to Yelich just for a minute, he averaged 3.78 points per game last year, which was more than Mookie Betts. And Chris said he was returning to like an MVP level, not the MVP level where he was approaching
50-40, yeah.
homers. Yeah. But a level, a 25 homer, 30-40 steal pace with a high on base percentage. That's what he was doing before he got shut down with the back issue. And what caused him to drop off as an MVP contender was back problems. Like, he was playing through a bad back for years. Back surgeries are complicated. Ask anybody who's had one. Like, it's not straightforward. And so we can't be sure what Christian Yelich is going to look like. I don't like hearing that he may not be ready for opening day. That to me is a red flag that caused me to drop him from 14th in my outfield rankings to 30th. So big drop. But I'm more in line with ADP. I'm still giving myself a chance to get Christian Yelich because I think the upside is high. And I think it's possible that the back surgery ends up being a boon for him if it helps him overcome all the pains he's been going through the last 4 years.
Yeah, I do just want to quickly touch on Riley Greene because we haven't talked about him. I don't want to discount the possibility of him just improving once again at his age. I think that's possible. Something like mid to upper 20s home runs, 6 to 8 steals. If the Tigers lineup gets better, just better counting stats all around, that's all in. I'm not going to say it's guaranteed to happen, but I think it's like a realistic possibility for Riley Greene to just continuing to get better. I just don't know that, again, that he has this huge upside like some of these other names we've talked about. All three guys better in categories or head-to-head points?
Yelich and Trout points. And I would say Greene. Greene's probably about the same.
Yeah, his plate discipline isn't great. Yeah. It's Riley Greene is Nick Castellanos to me, where if he gets out of Detroit, we're going to see a big breakout. But as it is, I think he just is what he is.
I realized I didn't ask you guys about the previous group. So Ryan Reynolds, Seiya Suzuki, Luis Robert. I think Robert clearly better in a categories league. The other 2 points?
Probably about the same. Maybe Reynolds slightly leans points. Maybe Suzuki too, but only slight.
All right. Continuing on with ADP, we have Ian Happ at 114.5. We have Randy Arozarena at 118.3 and Adolis Garcia at 122.3. Rounds 10 and 11 in a 12-team league. Ian Happ, a lot like Brian Reynolds, consistent, durable, know what you're going to get. He's also leading off for an improved Cubs lineup this year. And it feels like Arozarena and Adolis Garcia have kind of just been tied together for years now. It's like, oh, when one guy moves up in ADP, the other one moves up. When one guy moves down, they both move down together. Both are coming off down seasons. Scott, do you like either to bounce back? Randy Arozarena or Adolis Garcia?
I like Arozarena a little more to bounce back because he kind of already did. His numbers, first half, second half, stark difference there. First half, he hit 203 with 671 OPS. Second half, 242 with a 790 OPS. And actually, if you do the cutoff like first 2 months versus last 4 months, it's a much starker difference. Like Randy Arozarena clearly got burned in the cold weather. First burned in the cold weather. It's funny. In the first 2 months was one of those players. So we wrote him off early in the year. He came back strong, still ended up having a 2020 season. I've never had a high level of trust in Arozarena, and that trust is further diminished now. But I think at least in roto leagues, at least in category leagues, if you need a power speed threat, his cost is fine. I'm not eager to draft him, but the cost is okay. I'm less enthusiastic about Adolis Garcia. He did not really have that turnaround at any point last season, and the underlying data looked pretty strong. And I know there was some talk that things were mixed up for him mechanically, and maybe he does bounce back this year. I just don't know that that's a bet I want to take because he's going to be 32 years old. Yep. He's a lot older than you think he is. And that's his profile is the sort that tends not to age well. He would have to be further discounted beyond this for me to draft Adolis Garcia. He kind of marks the point in the outfield rankings where I am looking at other positions because I think there's a drop off here. There are a few still to come that I rank above Adolis Garcia, so it's not perfectly in line with ADP, but Adolis Garcia is below the cutoff for me.
Yeah, did just want to point out with Garcia, he dealt with a patella tendon strain in his left knee last year. He did 8 weeks of rehab this offseason. He should be a full go for spring training. You know, he didn't blame his down season on that, but sounds like he very clearly could have been playing through that. I don't really have anything statistical to back this up. I have a feeling that Adolis Garcia is going to bounce back. It's just, I don't know. I've seen what that guy can do when he's locked in. And
for me, it just really comes down to 30 versus 32. If I'm going to bet on one of these guys to bounce back, it's the guy who's not coming back from a knee injury and a guy who is 2 years younger. It's not a huge difference, but if I'm going to bet on either of these guys, it's Arozarena. Although Seattle is a tough place to hit, and that's concerning as well, but he was fine there for the most part, so I don't know.
37 career games in T-Mobile Park for Arozarena, 261, 6 home runs, 3 steals, 823 OPS. It's a bad place to hit, but he's managed to hit okay there so far in his career. So yeah,
Tampa's not a great place to hit either.
Yeah, no, it certainly is not. Better in categories or head-to-head points?
Both better in Roto.
Arozarena and Garcia better in Roto. Ian Happ better in points.
Yes. Yeah, we didn't talk about Happ, but Happ is a different category. Happ is the low variance sort of player, like a Brian Reynolds and a Suzuki. And he's clearly better in points because you don't have to worry about the batting average there. He gets on base at a nice rate. His head-to-head points per game, Ian Happ last year, 2.95, which let me see if I can find a good comp for that. I mean, it was better than Chourio and Jackson Merrill. That's the one I keep using. But yeah, it was better than Michael Harris. Let's do that one.
Right. We dropped down about 15 picks after Adolis Garcia. We get to Dylan Cruz and Stephen Kwan. They have an ADP of 137. Brandon Nimmo is just below those two at 141. We did talk about Cruz and Nimmo on yesterday's podcast. Chris has Cruz as a breakout. Scott has Nimmo as a sleeper. The one name we have not talked about yet from this group is Stephen Kwan, who's coming off a very interesting season is what I'll call it. He produced career best power numbers. He also plummeted in the second half. Chris, what are you expecting from Kwan? Do you target him in fantasy at all?
It's kind of like Anthony Santander, where it just kind of depends on if I need that batting average boost. Because I think that is the only place that he's a surefire standout. You know, you would think runs would be, but that was actually, well, I guess 83 and 122. That's very good lines. So yeah, runs and batting average. I'm not expecting 14 homers again. If you put the over under at 8.5, I think that'd be a good spot. I think he's fine. I don't really have a strong opinion on Stephen Kwan one way or the other. There are team builds where he's overkill and there's team builds where he's really, really necessary. And it just kind of depends on what path you're on.
Yeah. I mean, if you take an Anthony Santander, like Scott mentioned earlier, or Pete Alonso,
Kyle Schwarber,
maybe Kwan makes sense.
Even Ellie De La Cruz. Like if Ellie was your first round pick and you still need to make up for that, I think Stephen Kwan's a perfectly fine guy to reach for even.
And he's really good in a points league too. You know, if you just wait and you wind up with Kwan as your second outfielder in a points league, that's totally fine.
But he
strikes out at less than a 10% rate. So he was, to do this again, Stephen Kwan, 3.14 points per game last year. That was more than Fernando Tatis.
Yeah, he's not quite Luis Arias in terms of batting average, but in a points league especially, he walks a lot more. He's basically been a 10% walk guy, so that helps as well. But he's Luis Arias with, I don't know, 15 to 20 points of batting average shaved off, but more everywhere else. So I think it's a perfectly fine trade-off that I'd rather have Kwan for.
For me, it's totally format dependent for Kwan. I really don't want anything to do with him in Roto. I understand you're saying there's certain builds where he might be helpful, but he's going a lot earlier than Arias, isn't he?
Well, yeah, but he's much better.
Is he?
I think so.
Because Okay, he hit 268 in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Underlying numbers suggest that was the fluke, but still, nonetheless, he hit 268. And obviously, Stephen Kwan is coming off a second half where he hit 222. So he has these blemishes on his record. It's not, I think he's going to be a help in batting average, but it doesn't seem as certain as for Arise or as for a lot of other players.
Right, but Arise is much more obviously a zero almost everywhere else. Like last year was kind of a standout season for Arias in terms of runs. He had 83. He just, that's the same number as Kwan. And
what I'm saying is Kwan was a lot more interesting when we could pencil him in for 20 steals, and he dropped to just 12 last year. And it wasn't just that. His sprint speed went from 80th percentile in year 1, 71st percentile in year 2, 43rd percentile in year 3. So he may just be done as anything more than a average base stealer. And I don't know. And in a roto league for the cost, I'm never that interested in taking Kwan, even if I'm looking for batting average help.
The injury that Kwan suffered last year, I think it was a hamstring, wasn't it? Because that might explain why the sprint speed was down for him.
Yeah, it was a hamstring in May.
Yeah. So perhaps that affected him. I still think he's a pretty good bet for at least 15 to 20 steals. Stephen Kwan is leading off, and we'll see what he can do with the power. I mean, 8 to 10 home runs is probably what I would expect for him, but you kind of know what kind of profile you're going to get there. Scott, was there anything you wanted to add on Dylan Cruz? I don't know if you got to talk about him yesterday.
We talked about him enough with breakouts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Cruz very clearly better in a roto or categories league. Kwan and Nimmo better in points.
I mean, Cruz doesn't strike out much. I could see it being closer than for a lot of the players we've mentioned, like Randy Arozarena.
It depends if he's good or not, right? Like if he's good, he's probably just very good in both.
Yeah.
If he's what he was last year, then he's just a steal specialist.
Right. After Brandon Nimmo, we get 2 youngsters and an old. Pete Crow-Armstrong, Jason Dominguez, and Nick Castellanos. They're all going right around 150 ADP. That's the 13th round of a 12-team league. We spoke about Pete Crow-Armstrong and Dominguez on yesterday's podcast. We had Pete as a bust, and I had Dominguez as a breakout. Is that fair? I don't know. Both top prospects. I mean, Dominguez obviously was higher upside. Maybe not. Maybe we're not being fair to the two. And then we have Nick Castellanos, who is much less exciting than these two. He's older, obviously. I think he's a good deep league option. Kind of know what you're going to get, 25-ish home runs, and he's batting in the middle of a really good Phillies lineup. Scott, do you target either Dominguez or Castellanos? I would ask you about Crow-Armstrong, but I'm pretty sure you're out.
Yeah, at this cost, I'm out on Crow-Armstrong. Of course, I love Nimmo, who's part of this group, right? Brandon Nimmo. We talked about them yesterday. Opposite ends of the spectrum for me. Dominguez and Castellanos. We talked about Dominguez as a breakout candidate, right? Wasn't he one of your breakouts, Frank? And the kind of disparity between him and Dylan Cruz for me that I don't really think I have a great reason for. It's just kind of a gut thing. And recently I was tweaking my rankings and I moved them closer together. I at least got Dominguez and Dylan Cruz in the same tier. I think there's a lot of upside there for both, with power and especially speed for both, and good plate discipline for both. So they're actually pretty similar in terms of profile. And then Castellanos, boy, we're getting into some. This is like a really boring name, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. Like you can pencil Castellanos in for 25 homers and 85 RBI in that lineup with a not terrible batting average, and in 5 outfielder leagues, particularly deeper ones, that can be a player who kind of saves you during the season when attrition kicks in. But in anything shallow, Castellanos is somebody I'm just going to not even pay any mind to, because there's such a cap on his ceiling at this stage of his career.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to try and make the upside case for Pete Crow-Armstrong? Because I feel like we've only made the downside case.
Sure. The upside case is he's in the lineup every single day. He showed flashes of potential as a hitter at the major league level. And has a really solid minor league track record. I think better than he gets credit for as a hitter in the minors. The scouts never loved the tools, but say what you want about tools, but the production was 296 average, 883 OPS, while being pretty young across the board. He made it to AAA as a 21-year-old and held his own there. I'm not 100% sure Pete Crow-Armstrong is as bad of a hitter as I made it out to be last year.
You're not sure of yourself.
Yeah, look, I think there is value in admitting when you're uncertain about things. And in Pete Crow-Armstrong's case, the underlying numbers are...
The consensus is he was a stud prospect. So top 25 guy 2 years in a row. I ranked him lower because I'm with you. I don't think the skills we care about in fantasy are really there. But I think we're against the grain in saying that. I think the consensus, like the ADP, kind of makes the upside case for him, right?
Mm-hmm. I think all three of the names that we mentioned here, Crow-Armstrong, Dominguez, and Castellanos, all better in a Roto or categories league, right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll jump right back into Outfield ADP right after this.
Baby, we are gonna start a fire.
From world-renowned clubs
Simply devastating.
to worldwide stars,
Wrexham have done it. This incredible ride continues.
the English Football League on CBS Sports Network, and stream every match live on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today. Outfield Preview Part 2, and we are jumping back into ADP. We left off with Nick Castellanos. Scott, did something happen? You got this big old...
I was just looking at the chat. Sorry.
Oh, they're probably...
nothing worth bringing up on the air.
They must be blasting us right now. Anywho, let's keep things moving. We move past the top 150, and we get to Colton Cowser with an ADP of 157.8, Lane Thomas 161.8, and Josh Lowe at 169.3. A couple names we have not talked about at all this offseason. I brought up Lowe as a sleeper on yesterday's podcast, but Colton Cowser, Lane Thomas, I'm not sure that we've talked about them at all. I'm not really a fan of either one. I don't want to let that, kind of dissuade you guys from liking them. But Cowser, lots of strikeouts. Lane Thomas, do the Guardians even like him? I'm not entirely sure. Chris, what are your thoughts here on this group? Cowser, Lane Thomas, Josh Lowe.
I have almost no interest in Lane Thomas. I think if you listed every single hitter in the first 165 picks of ADP, there might be one worse hitter than Lane Thomas. And that's, again...
In the top how much?
In the top 165.
Well, explain what you mean by worst hitter, because he had 15 homers, 32 steals last year,
Just
28 homers.
As a hitter at the major league level, I just think he's an incredibly weak hitter. I think 2023 was a huge fluke outlier for him. He's a 700 OPS bat who will steal bases, and that's fine. But I don't think there's any difference between him and Cedric Mullins. There's a big difference in Cedric and their price.
Like 40, 50 picks.
Yeah, no, I mean, Cedric Mullins is clearly undervalued. But if we're doing Lane Thomas versus Pete Crow-Armstrong,
right? That's
Cedric Mullins I like better than both, and he's going a lot later. So let's just leave him out of it for a second.
Right. That's the one that I was saying might be, but at least Pete Crow-Armstrong is young enough that I can project improvement for. I think Lane Thomas, like the fact that he's a stolen base threat who's not a 0 in home runs is nice, but again, like Frank said, I'm not sure he's an everyday player, even in Cleveland. Like Cleveland's a bad lineup, and I'm not sure he's one of their 9 best hitters every single day. And
he has big left-right splits in his career. He's much better against lefties. So I don't think he'll be a short side platoon, but
yeah, he played.
It's not impossible.
They were a little funny with his playing time in August, but by September he was basically playing every day, and looks like he's currently penciled into the 5th spot. I mean, that bottom 4 in the lineup is dreadful. I don't know that they have that many alternatives to Lane Thomas, and like he's going to steal bases. He'll probably stumble into 15 home runs again. I find that at this stage of the draft, particularly in those deeper roto leagues, he can be a handy choice in the same way that like a Bryson Stott is, or an Andres Jimenez, or Pete Crow-Armstrong. It's just that he's cheaper than Pete Crow-Armstrong. And yes, Cedric Mullins is even cheaper. And in a perfect world, I wait even longer for Cedric Mullins. But sometimes in our drafts, Cedric Mullins is the one who goes before Lane Thomas.
Well,
and
Tommy Edman's cheaper. Like there are variations on this theme that are cheaper than Lane Thomas. Is the bigger for me? It's just I think there's a little bit of 2023 still being baked in there, and I think that was just a total fluke out. I don't think that was real at all. I'd rather take the chance that what Parker Meadows showed after coming back from his injury last year was for real. It's just there's a lot of similar skill sets in that range where I don't see any reason to pay what is kind of a premium for Lane Thomas relative to the other similar players. It's just that he's a 200 player who's ranked 160.
Okay. And that's fine. I probably wouldn't take him 160 either. I guess part of what I'm speaking to is the personal experience of people tend to pass him over a lot in our drafts. And there comes a point where it's like, well, he's clearly the best base stealer available who's not a 0 in power. And okay, I'll take him. He's probably going to be useful in roto leagues. 3 outfielder leagues, probably not. But 5 outfielder leagues, Lane Thomas will probably be of some use. Is he worth taking around pick 160? No, there's several players after him that I like more.
I might even rather have Victor Robles.
We just did a mock draft tonight when recording this 15-team roto. Lane Thomas went 185 overall.
Yeah, if that's what it is, and that's where closer to where he is in NFBC leagues. Yeah. If that's what it is, then it's fine. It's just I can't bring myself to get excited at all.
A quick thought on Colton Cowser, because we haven't talked about him. Runner-up for American League Rookie of the Year last year. Did some nice things. The power metrics are absolutely there. He hits the ball really hard. Barrel rate is good. But Scott, this is a 31% strikeout rate. He overperformed expected stats. Still young enough where he could improve, but I don't love the profile personally.
I mean, the Orioles are great at developing hitters, and he has a good pedigree, and he wasn't useless last year, obviously.
Yeah.
I wish he ran more. He's fast enough to run more. You when you picture Colton Cowser, the player, you picture a base stealer. He stole only 9 bases last year. If that changes, like I think that's what we're waiting to happen for Cowser before totally getting on board in fantasy. Is he going to start to run more? 75th percentile sprint speed. It's obviously a league that promotes stolen bases now, but we didn't see it from Cowser last year.
I will also point out he struck out a ton.
Mm-hmm.
The underlying metrics aren't quite as bad.
I agree.
His in-zone contact rate was 79%. That's actually not far from league average. He didn't chase very much. His chase rate was only 25%. So like you put those two together and that shouldn't be a 31% strikeout rate. Now he's maybe treads the line between passive and patient. You know, his in-zone swing rate was a little lower, so he's getting some strikes stolen from him. But on the whole, it doesn't look like a 31% strikeout rate to me. And if he gets that to a more manageable 27% with the quality of contact that he has and the athleticism, yeah, it can be a pretty exciting profile. So I think at cost especially, I think Cowser makes a lot of sense as a target.
All right. All three Lowe, Lane Thomas, and Cowser better in roto categories, right?
Yes.
I have no interest in any one of them in a points league.
All right, moving on down, we get to Jerks and Profar, ADP 171.5, Tyler O'Neill at 176.5, and Taylor Ward 187.5, rounds 15 and 16 of a 12-team league. 2 names on the move this offseason: Profar to the Braves, Tyler O'Neill to the Orioles. Taylor Ward, just kind of boring, high floor play, I feel like, but playing time should be pretty safe with the Angels. Profar had this mid-career breakout out of nowhere. O'Neill stayed healthy enough-ish to produce, but big left-right splits, lots of strikeouts from Tyler O'Neill. Do you guys find yourself targeting any of them? Profar, O'Neill, Taylor Ward?
I think all three are pretty interesting at cost, and especially relative to the guys who went off the board ahead of them. With the exception maybe of Profar, I think I like all three of them more. Sorry, with the exception of
Rafaela.
No, Cowser is who I was saying.
Okay.
Profar, O'Neill, and Ward, I think I like all three of them better than Lowe. And it's really, we got to do something about the Rays having two of them.
It's ridiculous.
We got to disperse them. It's not, my brain can't handle that. I like the three of them more than all the other two guys. I like Cowser
used
in
to
the
have
same.
all three.
They did used to have all three. Profar, it just seems like nobody's really taking the breakout seriously, and I get it. We should be skeptical. I was certainly skeptical for the entire year, but he also just spent an entire season putting up huge production, well, very good production with the underlying numbers to totally back it up. And so skepticism is reasonable. It's warranted. I think 180 in drafts, 171 here, 197 still since January 1st in NFBC leagues. It just, I think we're taking the skepticism too far. And I think you can maybe make the case that Taylor Ward is also being treated a little too skeptically. I know it's a bad lineup, and the perception is that he's just a guy, and I don't think that's a totally unfair perception, but he's underperformed his expected stats 2 years in a row now. That wasn't really an issue for him before, and if he gets back to what his underlying stats suggest, you could see him pushing 30 homers, and you could see a 255, 260 average with decent run production. So he's boring, but there might be just a smidge more upside with Taylor Ward than he gets credit for.
I mean,
he feels like
pretty deep into his career.
It feels like Nick Castellanos, and he's going 30 picks later.
Sure. I think Castellanos is a better bet for run production.
Right.
Yeah.
From 25 home runs and like 6 steals seems doable.
If you have the patience to stick it out with Ward, as somebody who's had Ward a few times in the past few years, it can be rough. It can be rough.
He was completely unusable in June and July last year.
Yeah, that's what tends to happen with him, and that doesn't mean it'll always be so, but that is what tends to happen with him. Where in April you're like, wow, I've stumbled upon this stud, and then he disappears for months, and you're like, is he ever going to come back? Should I just drop him? And it's that's the experience of having.
But if he always doesn't
mean it's always going to be so.
You gotta just ride it. I don't know. I don't worry. I don't know.
It's not like Blake Snell level rewards here. We're talking about.
Right, Blake Snell's 150 picks more expensive.
Yeah,
so,
I know. But
I think that
this is a part of the draft where Taylor Ward's going, where dropping is a legitimate option.
Right,
and,
but what I'm saying is that the guys being drafted around him, by and large, don't get there at the end.
Okay, Tyler O'Neill had 31 homers in. Like Tyler, I don't understand the cost for Profar, and I'll talk more about that later. But O'Neill, I don't really understand either. 31 homers in 113 games, an 850 OPS. Even as ridiculous as a strikeout rate was, 2.95 points per game last year. That was the same as Ian Happ. And now he's going to Baltimore, which might be bad for a right-handed power hitter, except they moved the fences in and left. So I don't think that's going to change much for him. I'm a little surprised there isn't more enthusiasm for O'Neill. It's almost like people are just pretending last year didn't happen. And I know the strikeout rate was high and all that, but
I mean,
that's just part of the Tyler O'Neill experience.
It was really high. Like 33.6% is borderline untenable, but he hits the ball hard.
It wasn't untenable last year. It was plenty tenable.
Yeah. Look, he's had trouble staying healthy. He's played just 58% of his games the past 3 years. Tyler O'Neill, the strikeout rate, the
213 XBA last year.
And the splits, 1179 OPS against lefties, 693 against righties.
I understand, but how many 40 homer threats are still out there in the draft?
I think the price is fine. I can see maybe wanting to rank him a little higher. I think it's fine.
I expected to be more excited about Tyler O'Neill, but once I dug in, I was like, nah, I'm not going to do it. But that's just me. Scott, Profar?
Not just you. It's and I haven't drafted him yet, so I'm not sure he actually with the people we draft with, maybe they're more enthusiastic than the average drafter. But yeah, I have him. So he's about 45th in the outfield rankings here, and I have him 36th or something like that. I don't know.
Worth pointing out, he was basically unusable the previous 2 years.
Sure.
So
it's a high variance.
Yeah,
it's a high variance profile, O'Neill, but we just saw the good side of the high variance last year, and usually when we see the good side, people are more willing to take a chance on it again.
Yeah, Profar, I did want to point out his NFBC ADP before getting signed by the Braves, 205, and since the day after signing, since then until now, it's like the past 3 weeks, 177. So Scott, is that still palatable around 175?
Yeah, because I have him ranked around 130, and he was a top 20 outfielder last year, or was it even higher than that? He was
higher than that. Yeah.
Yeah. He was really good. And I don't want to, like, my natural impulse coming off last season was, I don't want Jurickson Profar either. Clearly, like 11 years of him being not even rosterable in fantasy for the most part. And then he has this breakout season. It's great. And I can't count on that happening again. The age 31 breakout is normally not something you want to bet on. And so I ranked him 130th. And it turns out he was going like 100 picks later than that, even more like 50 picks now, but you get the idea. Like,
still a good value,
people just took it so far to the point that it's almost like last year didn't happen. And look, the underlying numbers support what Profar did last year. He worked with Fernando Tatis Sr. on his swing. That's apparently somebody Ronald Acuna worked with the year prior to him winning MVP when he cut way down on his strikeouts. He hit the ball harder, Profar did. It's possible those changes stick. And I think 130 is where I decided I'm willing to bet on that possibility. And it turns out he's going, like I said, 40, 50 picks after that. So I don't even have to bet on that possibility that high for Profar.
I think the key distinction between Profar and O'Neill, because it's a very similar case where they're both being valued as if last year was more or less a fluke. Profar's underlying numbers back up what he did last year, and O'Neill's don't. That's the biggest thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing is, like, we've seen O'Neill be a fantasy stud in the past before, and we haven't really seen that from Profar.
Yep. For Profar, by the way, finishes a top 12 outfielder in both formats last year, roto and head-to-head points. There was a report that came out on Tuesday, February 11th. Jurickson Profar is a candidate to lead off for the Atlanta Braves until Ronald Acuna is healthy. So
it's always had good on-base skills. That's one thing. Even in his bad years, that was there.
Yep. For all three of these guys, Profar, O'Neill, Taylor Ward, better in roto or head-to-head points?
Profar is better in points. O'Neill is better in roto, I would think. Though, like I said, 2.95 points per game last year. And who was the third one?
Taylor Ward.
Yeah, it's about the same.
Yeah, I think it's similarly meh in both.
All right, next up we have Kerry Carpenter with an ADP of 189, Tommy Edman at 198, and Elliot Ramos at 200.8. So we have two power options here with Kerry Carpenter and Ramos, and then you get some speed with Edman. I like Edman as a sleeper. Feels like a good value compared to Crow-Armstrong and Lane Thomas, names that we've talked about already. And I think Carpenter and Ramos, they both displayed legitimate power metrics. When you dig in, you look at it, it seems legit. I just worry about the splits for both, Chris, on opposite ends. So Carpenter, strong side platoon, almost no chance he plays against lefties, which will limit stats.
Started 2 games against lefties last year.
And Elliot Ramos destroyed lefties. He was bad against righties. So, like, if he slumps, does he become a short side platoon? I think it's a possibility.
That is, I think, less of a concern for me with Ramos, just because there just aren't that many guys who are true lefty-only hitters. It just doesn't happen that often. I'm not saying it can't be him. It just, most guys look like lefty mashers in small sample sizes, and then things tend to even out. And in Ramos's case, the underlying numbers are largely backing up what he did over the course of last season, which was a 25 homer, 8 steal pace, like not that different from like Brian Reynolds, actually. So I tend to buy Ramos to a certain extent. Carpenter, I'm confused by I guess love isn't the right word because he's the 200th pick. And so it's hard to say anyone loves the 200th pick, but I think people are getting a little too caught up in, wow, he had 18 homers in 292 plate appearances or whatever it was, and a 932 OPS. He's just got to stay healthy. And it's like, no, he started 2 games against lefties. I don't see any reason to think that's going to change. Like, if they weren't willing to trust him against lefties during a playoff race, why is it going to change? Like, if this is a key core piece for them, I think he's just like a platoon bat, and he's a really good platoon bat, but it's like, nobody's beating down the door to spend a top 200 pick on Jock Peterson.
Exactly. That's
who had basically the same season last year.
Several times in the offseason. Carpenter is a strict platoon player. And if you compare what he does, it's very similar to what Jock Peterson does, like you said. And he's among my busts this year because of how high Carpenter is going. People just seem unwilling to acknowledge that. Clear limits on his ceiling for what he can do for you in fantasy. And at cost, I'd much rather have Peterson. The one you were talking about before that, Elliot Ramos, I will point out 298 with an 888 OPS in the first half, 242, 695 in the second half. He hit like 2/3 of his home runs on the road. Unlike Michael Conforto, Elliot Ramos hasn't escaped Oracle Park, high strikeout rate, and just obviously not much of a track record there. So I'm kind of taking that second half as a warning sign that we got ahead of our skis on him, and we need to back down, because I'm not really sure I know who Elliot Ramos is, but I don't think he's particularly impactful for fantasy.
Mm-hmm. I'll quickly give the sleeper case for Tommy Edman, because we just haven't really talked about him. Weird year last year. He had the offseason wrist surgery, kept getting delayed, got traded to the Dodgers, didn't make his season debut until I believe it was August. And the final 37 games, 6 homers, 6 steals. So showed off a little power, a little speed. Obviously was awesome in the postseason. NLCS MVP, earned himself a contract extension with the Dodgers, 5 years, $74 million. I just think, assuming he's healthy, I think he gets closer to the player he was a couple of years ago when he was a top 70 player in 2021 and 2022. And I think, 260 with 12 to 15 homers and 30 steals. I don't think there's huge upside here, but I think if he does that, he's probably undervalued. So, this is an area where I'm always looking for speed in the draft. So
I would take him over Lane Thomas heads up.
Same. Yep. So there you go. Sleeper case there for Tommy Edman. Speaking of sleepers, let's get into a few more names, some sleepers, breakouts, and busts, if we have some late round busts that we're just avoiding here. Yesterday, we gave you some early to mid round names, but Scott, why don't you give us a deeper sleeper that you like in the outfield?
Deeper sleeper that I like in the outfield. So I will mention Jurickson Profar as one of my sleepers just because of the cost. The cost has forced me to make him a sleeper, even though my sensibilities said otherwise. Okay, TJ Friedl is somebody we haven't talked about yet, and he's going pretty late. And TJ Friedl, I think, is being undervalued. Now, he had a 226 batting average last year, but it was another one of those injury-plagued seasons that, like we've talked about for Bo Bichette and Brandon Nimmo. You kind of understand why the batting average slipped for Friedl. He had broken a fractured thumb in May, hamstring injury all of June and July, and there was a fractured wrist in there too. Like it was just a totally messed up season for TJ Friedl. The most questionable part of Friedel's skill set coming into the season was power. He, remember, in 2023 hit 18 home runs, 27 steals, 279 average, and 819 OPS. Was a must-start player, basically, but it was sort of like Isaac Paredes, where you looked at that StatCast page and there's no way TJ Friedl is capable of being this 15 to 20 homer guy. Well, even amid all the injuries last year, TJ Friedl homered 13 times in 341 plate appearances. So he sustained that. With the hamstring stuff going on, he didn't run as much. And again, I already explained the batting average was down. I think all of that could come back this year for Friedl. And certainly his ADP isn't giving him credit for that. I'm less concerned about the bottom of the barrel exit velocities impacting his power. Obviously, he plays in Cincinnati, but now he's proven that twice over, that what little power he has, it plays in that environment. So if he can stay healthy, get the batting average back up, get the steals back up, I think TJ Friedl is another player who's going to end up giving you numbers similar to, if not better than, Pete Crow-Armstrong at a much lower cost.
The cost, by the way, 268.4 as the 65th outfielder off the board for TJ Friedl. Chris, a deeper sleeper in the outfield.
We talked about Michael Conforto yesterday, right?
I don't think we did.
Michael Conforto, whose ADP is just really stupid.
I like him more than Friedl. I don't know. Okay, go
even since January 1st, his ADP is 279.2, and I kind of think the likeliest outcome is he's not that different than Kerry Carpenter. And I think the upside is he plays every day because he's been decent against lefties at times in his career and is kind of this year's Teoscar Hernandez. Like 270 average, 25 homers, 85 RBI. That doesn't really seem that outlandish for Michael Conforto, who still had very good quality of contact metrics last season, still hits the ball very hard, still has a good approach at the plate. And now he's going from one of the worst parks in baseball for left-handed power to a really good one in Dodger Stadium, and obviously a great lineup, although we expect him to be somewhat low in it, and there is some platoon risk here, but all in all, that stuff is more than baked into the price for Michael Conforto. I think he is plainly one of the most undervalued players in fantasy, and someone who should be drafted in every 12-team roto league.
I think it's one of those things where his ADP started so low that there just hasn't been enough of a chance for him to rise to where he should be, which is good for us because I think we're all in agreement that Conforto is a good sleeper this year.
So I think a lot of it's just people looking at 237 batting average and 759 OPS last year and like, what's the big deal? But yeah, those exit velocity readings for Conforto, they bounce back to higher level than they've been in years since 2016. If you're just looking at average and max exit velocity for a guy who, now he lost a lot of ground because of shoulder surgery, but it looked like a bounce back season for him just from those exit velocity readings. And if you look at the home away splits, I made reference to this earlier, how bad Conforto was at Oracle Park. 3 of his 20 home runs came at home. So I think the Dodgers looked at that data and realized if we get him out of there, we might have a stud on our hands. Yeah. Like the Dodgers have shown the last couple of off seasons, they can have basically whoever they want. And they chose Conforto this off season. And I think they said at the time they trust him against left-handed pitchers. So I don't even think platoon's going to be a big issue for him. Yeah, I think he's a steal.
3rd worst park factors for lefties, Oracle Park. 6th best, Dodger Stadium. So a huge difference in home park for Michael Conforto.
Yep. All right. A sleeper for me, and he's not really going that late. He's just outside the top 200, but Parker Meadows is someone that I'm interested in. He's the younger brother of former standout Austin Meadows, and he had some late round buzz this time last year. He struggled early on in the season. He got sent down to the minors where he crushed it. He got called back up in July. He played 2 games before he hurt his hamstring again. Finally returned in August, and he played well. Parker Meadows, final 47 games, hit .296 with 6 home runs, 5 steals, and .840 OPS, 21% strikeout rate, certainly manageable, and basically was leading off against right-handed pitching from mid-August on. That carried over into the playoffs. If you look at his career splits, Meadows actually isn't terrible against lefties. He actually was, he's been better so far against lefties than righties in his career. So I think there's a chance Meadows is just their everyday leadoff hitter in Detroit. I think he's got, 2020 potential, maybe a little bit less power hitting in that ballpark, 15 home runs, but like 25, 30 steals, solid on base percentage, could score a lot of runs this year. Yeah, I'm in. Chris, anything else you'd like to add on Meadows? I know you like him too.
Yeah, 165 career games at AAA. He has 27 homers and 38 steals. That is, even just take what he did last year and project it for a full season. Give him 600 plate appearances. He had 298. The math is pretty easy on that one. You just double it. 18 homers, 18 steals while hitting 245. I think he's probably going to hit a little better than 245. I think he's probably going to steal more than 9 bases. But on the whole, I think Parker Meadows is really undervalued. I said earlier I'd rather have him than Lane Thomas. I think I'd rather make that bet. I'd rather have him than Kerry Carpenter, especially in a roto league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think he's going about 10, 15 picks later. So it's not a huge difference in price. But yeah, if you're looking for that, a little bit more speed, then yeah, I think that certainly makes sense to go with Meadows there. Scott, do you have a late round breakout in the outfield?
I actually do. And it's a name that you've heard us mention a lot over the years, but not so much this year. It's Lars Nootbaar. Not giving up on Lars Nootbaar. And if you just look at his StatCast page and see all the red there, you'll understand why I'm not giving up on Lars Nootbaar. Still a fantastically disciplined hitter, 98th percentile walk rate, hits the ball exceptionally hard, 88th percentile average exit velocity, and his expected stats certainly last year exceeded his actual stats. So what happened to him? Well, injuries obviously played a part last year. He missed the first couple weeks with a fractured rib, and then there was a month with a strained oblique, and just kind of got derailed early on. And he actually spoke to this because if you'll remember at this time a year ago, we were saying, yeah, Lars Nootbaar, all the exit velocity data looks great. He needs to learn to elevate the ball more. And he actually spent that offseason with Nolan Arenado trying to do exactly that. Nolan Arenado's a master at that. Seems like a good time to spend a good player to spend time with if you're looking to elevate the ball. But I think what happened is those injuries early just kind of put him in catch-up mode, and that just gave me a funny image, catch-up mode. And so what he said is Lars Nootbaar, when he was kind of reflecting back on last season, I felt like I was in a good place heading into spring, and then the ribs happened. I think I forgot some of the things that I was working on because I couldn't do those movements. I tried to play catch up a little bit, but it was my fault for not being a great self-evaluator. I needed to not forget certain things we worked on in the off season. So seems recommitted to improving that fly ball rate. And if he does, I think those exit velocities will play better. And again, with great on base skills, even a pinch of speed there for Lars Nootbaar. I still think there's a lot of upside.
I'm completely with you. Like, I just will not quit. Like Willie Calhoun, someone for years, I just couldn't quit. Lars Nootbaar is one of those guys. I will not quit. Chris?
He was 190th in pulled fly ball and line drive rate out of 287 hitters. So that kind of sums it up, where like there are some pretty decent hitters in his range. Bobby Witt, pretty good hitter. Freddie Freeman, right next to Lars Nootbaar. It's just he's not those guys. So, that's the issue is you see him right next to like Andrew Vaughn. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Like they both hit the ball pretty hard, but they're not Freddie Freeman. They're not Bobby Witt Jr. They don't have that plate discipline. And so that's the key thing is just, can he hit the ball to the pull side in the air more? If he can, I think there's room to grow. It's
encouraging to know he's working on it.
Yeah. I've been bitten before by it.
Mhm.
And
Oh yeah.
the fact that he was working on it last year and it still didn't happen is a reason to be discouraged, I would say, even though what you said
it's encouraging that he spoke to that,
But yeah, I wish I was more encouraged, I guess.
That the cost is so low that I feel like, look, I'm not structuring my draft around getting Lars Nootbaar late. And we actually did a 15-team mock earlier tonight and I kept passing him up and ended up missing out on him. But the cost is so low that I hope I don't do that in every 15-team draft. I would like to have some shares of him.
We're hoping he goes mustard mode this year, right?
Yeah, mustard mode instead of ketchup.
Is that a Kendrick Lamar reference?
Would you relish that?
None of these condiments would actually be good with an actual Nootbaar, but
it's getting worse and worse. The ADP for Nootbaar, by the way, is right around 300. I'm with you, Scott. I will not quit. Still hits the ball hard. Great eye at the plate. He's got to stay healthy. I mean, that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, that's also,
He hasn't played more than 117 games in a season yet, but roster resource has him as an everyday player. He was better against lefties and righties last year, so we'll see. Please give us a healthy Lars Nootbaar. Chris, do you have a late round breakout in the outfield?
Yeah, I'll just default to a guy who was a near top 100 pick last year and is now not even a top 250 pick, and that's Evan Carter from the Rangers, who I understand that it was a very bad 45 games. It was 45 games. Our opinion of a player should not change that much based on 45 game sample size. And Evan Carter is basically going 150 picks later than he was last year. So even if you're skeptical of the skill set, there is no reason not to give Evan Carter a try at 250, because if it works out, we're talking about a guy who could have an excellent approach at the plate, could hit near the top of a very, very good lineup. And, despite dealing with a back injury, 97th percentile sprint speed last year. So there's room for 15, 20 stolen bases if he gets on base a ton, maybe 15 to 20 homers. I think there's too much acting like Evan Carter is just not all that talented after one bad injury-prone season.
Yeah, and this offseason, he underwent an ablation procedure on his back. Doctors removed some tissue that had been affecting his recovery from a lower back stress reaction. So he's coming back from that, says he's healthy heading into spring training. I think there are some names to really pay attention to in spring and see how they're doing. I think Evan Carter is one of them. Let's watch and see, okay, how's he bouncing back? Is he playing every day? Is there any power here in spring training? And just kind of hear the reports about, how he feels physically. I think Evan Carter is a good name to watch there. For me, I'm going to go with kind of similarly. I mean, we've heard his name for a long time now, post-hype breakout. Jordan Walker, the ADP is 304.8 here. I think the Cardinals just need to commit to Jordan Walker. It seems like that is going to be the case this year. They're kind of half in, half out, but they have a lot of youngsters on the roster. It seems like they're committing to playing a lot of these names here. And Jordan Walker finished strong last year. I don't want to put too much stock into that. He had a big September where he looked much better. And there were some quotes this offseason, that same Cardinals fan fest where Mason Witten said he wants to steal 30-plus bases, where Jordan Walker mentioned he's gone back to an old swing that he used back in the minors when, he hit for much more power, and that made him one of the top prospects in all of baseball. So I don't think, he's I don't think there's you're winning your league if you draft Jordan Walker, but if he, comes together here, 20 to 25 home runs, 8 to 10 steals, plays every day, I could see it happening. So
it feels like a low probability, it feels like a true lottery ticket. It's probably not going. You got to draft Jordan Walker with the assumption he's going to do next to nothing for you, but he could be a league winner. He absolutely has that kind of upside for as late as you're getting him. That could be the pick that wins you your league.
All right, just give me some names here that you are most likely to draft. If you want to do like one early, one mid, one late, who are you guys lining up with most in the outfield?
Luis Robert, Dylan Cruz, and Evan Carter.
Scott?
Oh, that was so quick. I didn't get a chance to think about it.
Because I did it. I did my homework. I did it before the show.
I know.
I could go. I'll stall for you a little bit here. Say a Suzuki. I was all over him last year. I'm going back to the well there. Power, speed, good batting average. Josh Lowe, category leagues, a little bit of power, some speed. I think he could do some big things in that hitting environment in George Steinbrenner Field. And Tommy Edman. This is where I'm looking to get my speed in drafts. I don't think there's massive upside, but in that Dodgers lineup, even towards the bottom, I mean, it's the best lineup in all of baseball. Yeah, I think we get a little bit of pop and a good amount of speed there from Tommy Edman. Scott?
I mean, a couple weeks ago, I would have said Christian Yelich, but like I said, I just moved him way down. So it's probably not going to be true anymore. I mean, I've found I've drafted Corbin Carroll already in a couple leagues because I think among first rounders, I'm higher on him than the average person. So if I pick at a certain spot, I'm just always going to end up with him late in round one, but still. Probably Brandon Nimmo because he's the outfielder whose value I like the most of anybody. So that would be the mid-range target. And if we're doing a late target, I am going to say Michael Conforto. I'm not sure it's happened yet, but it needs to start happening because I really have a lot of faith in him.
All right, let's wrap up with the rest of outfield ADP. I'm going to throw names at you guys in groups of five, so we can just kind of speed through this here. But outside of the top 200 in ADP.
Oh, sorry, I should have said Jackson Merrill. I'm drafting a lot of Jackson Merrill. I'm higher on him than the consensus for sure. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Fair enough. Outside the top 200 in ADP, we have Alec Burleson, Cedric Mullins, Parker Meadows, Victor Robles, Lourdes Gurriel. We spoke about a few of these names. Meadows as a sleeper. Chris had Robles as a sleeper yesterday. Anything else, Chris, you'd like to add on Alec Burleson, Cedric Mullins, Lourdes Gurriel?
I mean, Mullins, it's a skill set that will cost you a lot more than he does. So I think he's a great target. Gurriel, it seems like he's just like the 43rd best outfielder in fantasy every year. And that's fine, but there's doesn't seem to be much upside there.
Good deep league target.
Yeah, he's a nice stabilizer in a deep league. I think that's probably also true of Alec Burleson. Alec Burleson's one of those guys that, like, doesn't it feel like he should be like a 20 steal guy? Like, not because he should run more, but just like everything about his profile would be much more interesting if he was also a 20 steal guy. But because he's more like an 8 to 10 steal guy, it's fine. I don't think he's special. I like Meadows and Robles a lot more than anyone here.
Burleson is sort of like Elliot Ramos, where he was very intriguing early in the year and he just collapsed in the second half, and he collapsed harder than Ramos did.
You know what the skill set reminds me of, though? It reminds me a lot of Josh Naylor before he broke out. It makes a lot of contact. He doesn't hit the ball extremely hard, but hits it hard-ish. 20 plus home runs is the expectation. Probably going to bat in the middle of the lineup. Probably not going to play against lefties, so I think that kind of limits the upside. I like the profile here. I just wish he was an everyday player. The
strikeout rate's very low. It's funny. I liked Burleson more when he was just a theoretical player, and then once we actually got him getting regular bats, it was like, he's okay, I guess.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add on Mullins real quick, Scott, and then
I had a stat to add on Mullins, if that's okay. So we've obviously seen him be a fantasy stud in the past, and I'm not counting on him being a fantasy stud, but I don't think we can rule it out because Mullins' first 60 games last year, 174 batting average, 532 OPS. Final 87 games, he hit 277 with an 834 OPS. So you look at the overall numbers and you come away with one impression, but he turned on a dime there in June and basically was a stud the rest of the way.
My only concern with Mullins is, will he play every day? I know he has been throughout most of his career, but last year, really bad against lefties, 506 OPS. The Orioles have added all this depth this offseason. So I think they might have enough bodies to make it happen where he's only a strong side platoon. So
But
maybe that limits the playing time a little
he
bit.
didn't really play every day last year. There were plenty of days off sprinkled around, and he only had 101 plate appearances against lefties. So it's not like he was a true everyday player.
All right, outside the top 225 in ADP, we have George Springer, Jorge Soler, Nolan Jones, Byron Buxton, and Jesus Sanchez. Another player that I really want Jesus Sanchez to be a thing. He actually did some things last year, I guess, to his credit. Scott, do any of these names stand out? Springer, Jorge Soler, Nolan Jones, Byron Buxton, Jesus Sanchez.
Well, I mean, Nolan Jones does, because we were drafting him in like round 4 last year. He was coming off this, I mean, for good reason. He was coming off a very impressive season with the Rockies, showed power and speed and good on base skills and hit the ball very hard. There were a lot of reasons to buy into what he was doing. But that's why until a player develops a track record, you can never be totally sure, even if the underlying numbers support what he's doing. That doesn't mean that isn't the fluke in and of itself. So obviously people are very skeptical of Jones now, which presents an opportunity. It's sort of like what I was saying for Jordan Walker, though, where if I'm drafting a Nolan Jones, I'm in a situation where I'm not counting on getting anything from Nolan Jones. I am just simply buying a lottery ticket and hoping he delivers those 2023 numbers again, or something close to.
Draft him with the hope that he's going to be good half the time. And if you get more than that, great. But if you don't, it's still a decent pick at that price. I do just with Jorge Soler. I mean, this is kind of an evergreen question, but what the heck are the Angels doing? Like, why was like trading for Jorge Soler like the first thing they did this offseason? Like, where are guys supposed to play here? I don't understand. Like, is Mike Trout just the everyday center fielder for the Angels again? We're just doing that. That's just the plan. Is like, I just don't understand. Like, they have too many
that they can play in center field.
That's is Joe Adell someone they think can play center field? I don't think so. Like, I don't understand what the plan is here. And I guess that's the Angels in a nutshell.
They seem like a team that really needs to rebuild. I'm guessing the owner's not willing to commit to a rebuild, so they're just kind of meandering along.
Yeah. And I mean, I just looked up Taylor Ward, 84th percentile range, outs above average, but as a left fielder. So I don't
know if he's really played any center field. It's just
throw him in center either.
Like, I don't hate a lot of the moves that they made this offseason in a vacuum, but it just, none of it makes any sense.
They just hope all these guys go off and they could just flip them at the deadline for.
Yeah, that's the plan. Like, I think these are, the Jansen signing, the Moncada signing, like, I think they make sense in a vacuum. It's just the way everything fits together doesn't make sense. And I want to we cannot let the moment pass.
You got to do it.
Without saying that when Byron Buxton is on the field, he remains an absolute difference maker. And I don't care that he can't stay healthy if the cost is the 260th pick or whatever it ends up being.
It's never been lower, right? I'm surprised you haven't been talking about him more this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last season in 102 games, 279, 18 home runs, 7 steals, and 859 OPS for Byron Buxton. When I dug the data,
he plays every day when he's out there. Like, when he's healthy, you just start Byron Buxton, and then you put him in an IL spot when he's not. You don't have to overthink about it. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to say, "Oh, he can't stay healthy." We know. We get it.
He's a good player in daily lineup leagues too.
Yeah,
just throw him out there whenever he's healthy. So
2.92 head-to-head points per game last year. That's more than Riley Greene.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out with Jorge Soler, did get much better from June on last year. Hit 263, 15 homers, 855 OPS. Still hit the ball really hard, and it is a positive park shift going from San Francisco, who was 28th in home run park factor, to the Angels' 5th best home run factor. So, deeper leagues, we talked about being devoid of power this year. Like, Soler, 25 plus home runs outside the top 250. Yeah, maybe
36 2 years ago.
Yeah. So I kind of like it. Jesus Sanchez, he did some nice things last year, a little power, a little speed, but still really bad against lefties, questionable plate discipline, bad Marlins team. So as much as I want him to be a thing,
It's not a thing.
Are we done with George Springer?
I think in deeper leagues, if you just need 15-15 with a good amount of runs scored, it's not a bad bet.
Yeah, I
it
think we're pretty much done. Yeah.
It just
If you
feels
look at
like
the OPS trend 4 years with Toronto, it's just going down.
I mean, the cost is fine. The idea that he is clearly deep into decline, I think, is already priced in, and so the cost is fine for George Springer. But I also buy into that idea that he's just deep in decline now.
So like we talked about, we did the NFBC show a few weeks ago, and like there is best ball and there are like the draft champions, like draft and holds. And I feel like Buxton is a better best ball guy.
Yeah. And
Springer, because he has stayed remarkably healthy the last couple of years, is a decent draft and hold option, just because you might not be happy about it as it's happening. But if at the end of the season he's hitting 240 with 18 homers and 15 steals and scores 75 runs, it's like, yeah, he'll probably be fine. It's just in a managed league, I'd rather take a chance on any one of a dozen players with more weekly upside.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I did only one NFBC Gladiator draft where you literally draft your lineup.
Yeah, the Gladiator. That's what it was. Yeah.
I took Springer as my fourth outfielder in that format. So
he's fine there because at the end of the day, the numbers will be decent. But over the course of the season, you're going to have better options every week.
Yep. Outside the top 260 in ADP, we see Jake McCarthy, TJ Friedl, Evan Carter, Garrett Mitchell, and JJ Bleday. We mentioned Friedl. We mentioned Carter. Jake McCarthy bounced back last year. He still has a lot of speed. I think he's going to be an every player for the D-backs, which is going to be a really good lineup. Do any of these other names stand out? McCarthy, Mitchell, JJ Bleday.
I'm seeing Garrett Mitchell get some buzz.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't really either. If you pace out his numbers last year, so in 224 plate appearances, he had 8 homers, 11 steals, hit 255. Okay, like if that's what you're looking at and you're pacing that out, it's a nice pace. He also struck out 32% of the time, and that was his best strikeout rate in 3 partial seasons. So I don't know that we can actually trust him to maintain that pace over a full season, particularly if he's playing a lot against left-handers. I think if you treat Garrett Mitchell like a low-end steals guy, it's probably fine. But if you're hoping he has a huge breakout, I think that's going to disappoint you.
All right. Anything else here? JJ Bleday and McCarthy.
JJ Bleday is not wholly uninteresting. And I could see a Taylor Ward-esque season playing, in what we think will be a much better park. I could see him hitting 260 with 25 homers. I think that's within the realm of possibility. There's a chance he ends up as the 42nd best outfielder in fantasy next year.
Yeah, Bleday seems like the sort of outfielder I'm going to draft in an AL only league.
AL only 15-team league. Yeah, fine. Yep. Late round target.
Yeah.
Outside of the top 280 in ADP, we see Roman Anthony, the top prospect with the Boston Red Sox, Matt Wallner, Jung-Hoo Lee, Joe Adell, and Lars Nootbaar. We already spoke about Nootbaar. Roman Anthony, there's power, there's speed. He's also just 20 years old. He's not on the 40-man roster. I think the Red Sox slow play it a little bit here. Maybe it's like summertime-ish when we get Roman Anthony. Matt Wallner, there's big-time power here. Jung-Hoo Lee, a big signing for the Giants last offseason, came over from Korea, expected to hit for a good batting average. And Joe Adell actually provided power and speed, 20 home runs, 15 steals, 207 batting average. So not great there. Scott, any of these names stand out to you?
I know some people will get excited about Matt Wallner. And to give you the numbers, he hit 080 in April and then went to the minors, but he looked good after coming back. July 7th, he came back, hit 282, 12 homers in 62 games, 945 OPS. But I think it's a mistake if you're just going to take those numbers from Matt Wallner and say, yeah, this is who he is. I think his profile lends itself to streakiness. It's a 3 true outcomes kind of profile where, yeah, when he's hot, he's going to hit a bunch of home runs. You're going to think he's a superstar. But then he's going to have stretches where he hits 080 too, because he just doesn't make enough contact in general. And during those stretches, he might even drop out of the Twins lineup. So he strikes me as potential fool's gold in fantasy. His cost is fine, but just don't expect too much from Matt Wallner.
Yeah, I combined the last 2 years of production together. I think it was right around 150 games, something like that. It was 254, 27 home runs, and 886 OPS there for Matt Wallner. He crosses the ball. He also strikes out 34% of the time during that stretch.
I do think Jung-Hoo Lee could be Stephen Kwan-esque. Because he did attempt 5 steals in 37 games last season. He made a ton of contact, 8.2% strikeout rate, 9.6% whiff rate. We're basically top of the scale. And so if he could steal 15 bases and score 10 or hit 10 homers and, maybe score a decent amount, 85-ish runs, there could be some value with Jung-Hoo Lee.
All right. Yeah, he is coming back from a torn labrum, by the way. Yeah, so he had shoulder surgery. Keep that in mind. He might be another name to watch during spring training, Jung-Hoo Lee, just to see how he's doing in that recovery. Names outside the top 300 in ADP: Brandon Marsh, Wilyer Abreu, Luke Raley, Matt Vierling, Michael Conforto. We spoke about Conforto.
Yeah,
one of these things is not like the other.
Exactly. Yeah, that he does not belong with this group because we're into really deep options now. And yeah, Conforto deserves more credit than that. I don't know. Do you want me to just give you some really deep options that I kind of like at this point, or no?
Yeah, you can. I mean, anyone that we haven't mentioned yet, feel free to go for it.
Max Kepler signing with the Phillies after an injury-plagued year. He has a pretty good track record. Nobody's targeting him in drafts. He didn't go in this 15-teamer we just did. So we're talking about a really deep league option. But even if he goes undrafted in your league, I think Max Kepler is going to be somebody to keep an eye on in that Phillies lineup. And I also like Trevor Larnach. I think the data is really strong on him. It's kind of a Lars Nootbaar situation where except the Twins don't seem to really stick with him for long enough. They did give him an extended look in the second half last year, and it wasn't amazing, but he hits the ball hard. He has good plate discipline. I think they're going to give him a chance at the start of this year too. And it surprised me if Trevor Larnach still turned into something. Andy Pages, who I actually did take in the 15-team roto draft here, as my 5th outfielder. Heading into spring training, it doesn't look like he has a starting job for the Dodgers, but depending on how Hae-Sung Kim looks at second base and if Tommy Edman gets some looks at shortstop, it's possible they could line up with Edman as shortstop, Betts at second, and then Pages in center field. Even if it doesn't happen on opening day, there will come a point in the season, I'm sure, where Pages is playing every day in the Dodgers outfield, and young guy who has power and will be in a great lineup. I think somebody you don't want to forget about.
I'll also throw Heston Kjerstad as a name who probably needs an injury to really be fantasy relevant. And, it is not a sure thing, even if that does happen, but definitely a name to know. Look, Victor Scott last year was a guy we really liked coming off a really good season at AA.
Some of us liked him.
Really bad at the Royal We. You know what? You got guys wrong too, Scott.
I know. That was just
Miguel Vargas,
a player of contention coming into the season.
No, Victor Scott was very bad in the majors. He was pretty bad at AAA as well. I think his prospect stock has taken a big hit, but
it seems to be penciled in right now.
There could be a Bryce Terang outcome here. And obviously Bryce Terang is a top 150 pick. Victor Scott, not. So I think he's a name to know. And Hunter Goodman, if he plays somewhat regularly, even 4 or 5 times a week for the Rockies, could be a starting caliber catcher.
Yeah, you'd be playing him at catcher.
You would not want to use Hunter Goodman at outfield, but
yeah,
if I'm remembering, he has some pretty bonkers minor league numbers, if I'm remembering correctly. Like a 929 career OPS at the minor league level for a guy who's catcher eligible, 80 homers in 294 games. So that's one that if he gets the chance could be a really useful fantasy option at catcher.
Yes.
Not outfield.
I'll throw some prospect names out there, guys that could make an impact at some point this season. Chase DeLauder with the Cleveland Guardians, Emmanuel Rodriguez with the Minnesota Twins, Owen Casey and Kevin Alcantara with the Cubs. They just have so many names. I don't know where these guys are going to play. Chandler Simpson is a name in Tampa Bay who has a ton of speed. Not really much else, but he could be up at some point. And Zach Veen with the Rockies, who was once a high-end top prospect who's dealt with a lot of injuries, but maybe gets an opportunity to play every day in Coors Field. So.
There's an outside chance Chase DeLauder breaks camp with the Guardians.
I think there's a pretty good chance.
Yeah, there was a lot of hype. Yeah, there was a lot of hype around him. He has not been able to stay healthy. I think it's almost entirely foot injuries, which is concerning that it's been so recurring. He's got a weird swing as well, but scouts love him. He's been productive when he's been on the field, and yeah, there's a chance they fast track him.
On the subject of prospects, well, first let me say Chandler Simpson. It's an Xavier Edwards type profile. He's hit like 350 in the minors with lots of speed. So we'll see. That's a profile that doesn't work in the majors very often anymore. But if he gets a chance, I think Chandler Simpson will definitely attract interest in fantasy. But what I was going to say, while we're on the subject of prospects, did we actually say when we're looking to draft Roman Anthony? Because I feel like normally when there's a consensus number 1, number 2 type prospect overall who's clearly going to reach the majors at some point in the first half of the season, there's a lot more interest in him than there appears to be for Roman Anthony right now. And I find that fascinating. I think it's justified given the way these guys have let us down in recent years.
Well, and it just doesn't look like there's like if they had traded Masataka Yoshida, then you could start to talk yourself into it. But it's just
he almost needs 2 people.
Yeah, the Red Sox have pieces on pieces in the outfield, and so
do you expect them up in the first quarter of the season though? Because I do. I don't think there's a much chance he breaks camp with the team, but
I think like Willie Abreu probably has to fail. And there's a decent chance that happens. There are things to like about Willie Abreu, but I don't think he's a great player. And so
anybody gets hurt. I mean, anybody in the outfield or DH gets hurt, which is likely to happen too.
Yeah. So I personally think Roman Anthony's going to be a superstar. I know he's a top 3 prospect in pretty much everyone's list. So that's not exactly going out on a limb, but the quality of contact metrics he's put up as a 20-year-old in the high minors are really, really special. So I'm extremely excited about Roman Anthony.
So he's going about 275, 285. If that's a bench spot in your league, I think it's a good choice.
Yeah, especially if you're drafting before or during spring training when we don't know, because if it looks like for some reason he's going to be a starter for them, you're talking a top 150 pick easily for Roman Anthony.
All right. That's going to do it. Outfield is in the books. We are going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.